And it's a very, very good morning from Parktown. Good morning from Aki Anastasiou, and welcome to the Business Day Dialogues in partnership with Altron People Solutions. Hope that you guys are well wherever you are around the country. It's just wonderful to have you with us. I mean, this is the new normal, right? You're attending this conference, you are working remotely wherever you might be. In fact, do tell us where you are at the moment. Just introduce yourselves on the chat over there. You'll see the chat on. I mean, we all know how to use the chat right now. I'm sure you've changed your images and your emojis. I mean, gosh, some people are coming up with some fancy things on these virtual calls, but it's really wonderful to have you all with us this morning. And I think we're going to talk about such an important topic. You know, you talk about digital business transformation and why digital adoption is key. And I guess that this is the new buzzword, right? Everyone is talking about it. And, you know, it's amazing to think that here we are in the month of May 2021. And I mean, I just need to remind you what it was like back in 2020, in March. In the beginning of March, we kind of heard about this pandemic. Well, we heard about it in January. We thought, well, it's never going to affect us. Then when it was declared a pandemic and when the country started taking action, I'll never forget those days when that last middle week, I guess, in March, when the President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that there's going to be this lockdown happening across the country and everything was just shut down. So what did businesses do? They had to digitally transform. We had to scale up. Businesses, what was impossible soon became possible. And it's all through technology, right? I mean, if this had happened, say, 10 years ago, it would have been a totally different picture. Cloud adoption has matured. Businesses have got the flexibility and the agility to really deploy these work from home solutions. But the reality is we've got a lot more work to do. And this is going to be the new way of doing things, I guess. I'm talking to many executives during the lockdown. Everybody thought that by January 2021, it's all going to be back to normal. We'll be back at work and things will be back to normal. Well, guess what? We're still doing these things virtually. So do tell us exactly where you're from. And I'm also interested to know, right, which of you are still working remotely? Who has not gone back to the office since the lockdown? I'm really curious to know. And those of you who are back at the office, how many times a week do you go to the office? And how many times have you been to the office since the lockdown was introduced back in March 2020? Now, the hashtag for today's event is hashtag Altron People Solutions, hashtag Business Day. It's going to be such an exciting discussion we're going to be having. And I want to give a special welcome to my speakers, two joining me here in the studio and one joining me on Zoom. But let me start off. Priscilla Rampati is sitting right next to me. Priscilla is the Managing Director of Altron People Solutions. Hello, Priscilla.
Hello, Aki.
Nice to see you. When was the last time you were in the office?
Last week.
Last week. Okay, but you're the big boss, you know. but I guess, is most of your office still working remotely?
Because we have contact centers, a lot of the staff are expected to be in the office.
Okay.
But we have a combination of in the office and work from home.
Fantastic. Daryl Marcus is the Head of Business Development and CX Enabling Technologies at Altron People Solutions. How are you doing? Nice to see you, Daryl.
And you too, Aki. Good to see you too.
Have you been back at the office? I guess you're very hands-on, right, operationally?
So yeah, also dovetailing between working from home and office.
Yeah.
It's often great to be face-to-face, and because you have the contact center and everyone's there, you know, it does make sense to sometimes be in the office.
Yeah, but I guess that if you look at 365 days, the last year, you can probably count it on your hands how many times you've been back at the office, right? You haven't been back for more than 30 days, that's for sure, in total. So interesting. And it's a great pleasure to welcome my mate who I've known for such a long time. He's an inspiration to so many people. He's written so many different books, and he really, what we are talking about today runs through his DNA. Johnsanei, futures specialist and strategist in Cape Town, joining us via Zoom. Hello, John. How are you doing, my friend?
Wonderful, thank you. Wonderful to be with you all. Really looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, listen, I want to ask each of you, and let me start off with you, John. I mean, you have been speaking about digital transformation even before the pandemic even started, right? How do you define digital transformation? What's your overview on digital transformation and where we are?
Well, I mean, obviously, digitization has been with us for the last 20 odd years. And so the internet has really started to pick up a sort of maturity to a certain extent. And we're starting to now really start to understand it with a lot more detail. I do think that what we need to realize that what digitization is actually doing to us is fast tracking us to really redesign what work looks like and how we add value to the world. I think what we must also really keep in mind, on top of mind, is automation. You know, automation is going to be pretty much taking out every single type of job's basic underbelly. In other words, anything that needs to be seen with efficiency or process-driven processes will be automated, whether you're a doctor or an accountant or a blue-collar worker. And also we must realize that the surplus society that we come from, the society that has educated people in the same way for the last 100 years, is also starting to come to an end. So we have two new things that are happening, and I think these need to be taken into account. The first one is that we are seeing a massive move away from surplus economy to passion economy, and we can unpack that a little bit later. And also we're moving away from digitization to dispersion. And again, we can unpack those topics as well as we go through the day.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I was reading some fascinating research. I mean, they've been tracking this kind of stuff that you're talking about, and they reckon that by 2025, you know, what we're currently doing right now, 30% of the tasks that we currently do day to day are going to be automated in some way or another. So I guess to your point, it's happening without us even realizing it. And I think if you look at this device here, the smartphone that we've got on our hands, and how that's revolutionized how we do things. I mean, just how we commute, for example, we use the maps. I mean, I know that you do a lot of sports stuff, you know, that stuff's all automated in the back end. It takes your heart rate and measures it and gives you some precise statistics for you to work on. But from a work point of view, Priscilla, I mean, it's so interesting when you look at this digital transformation, and I guess that what's happened is that many organizations had this on their timeline for something to happen. Well, the transformation's been taking place, but I think COVID has accelerated it to such a point that whatever people were working on 3, 4, 5 years from now, they've now done it, and they're thinking even ahead of that, right? Is that your viewpoint? How do you see digital transformation?
Absolutely, Aki. I think digital transformation started quite a few years back, but it wasn't a point of urgency, you know,
yes,
for companies and for individuals.
Right.
And with COVID coming along, that journey has been accelerated. But accelerated from multiple points of view, you know, so accelerated from an organizational point of view, and how do we do things differently in order to survive within the COVID environment. Also accelerated from an employee point of view. So how do I take digital adoption and digital transformation and adopt that within my organization? But also if you look at the skills within the country, how do we create those skills for the future in order to be able to adopt digital transformation?
Do you think that we're lacking that? Because if you talk to most people, they say that skills is a big challenge in our country. These kind of skills that we're talking about to adopt digitally are, I mean, there's just a massive gap in the country at the moment.
100%, and I think there's lots of interventions underway. So we've identified as a country that it is a skills gap.
Yeah.
You know, and with industry bodies, these skills gaps are being addressed at
Fantastic.
the moment.
And to the audience out there, you know, we really want you to be part of this discussion. And if you've got any comments that you want to make, we'd love you to share your experiences that you've experienced with digital transformation. I'm really keen to hear from you out there. And by the way, do introduce yourself. Tell us where you are and which company you're representing and what brings you here today. But yeah, it's such an interesting journey. And you talk about people, and the biggest hurdle to digital transformation is in fact people. When you speak to most executives, you know, that's what one of the big hurdles they highlight to really get this process going. But now, Daryl, I mean, you've seen some really interesting stuff happening because you're very much hands-on the business development and the CX enabling technologies. What's your take on this digital transformation that's happening?
So Aki, I think you hit the nail on the head a little earlier. I think digital transformation was always something that we spoke about. Very often it was on slide 53 of a deck.
Yes.
Often lip service.
Slide 53, hey? You were paying you were paying attention to those PowerPoint presentations.
I'll take notes. But I think to your point, I think what happened is, you know, COVID arrived and suddenly digital transformation became the buzzword.
Yes.
And not because it was a buzzword, but because the reality hit that we had to actually transform digitally. I think the exciting space for me was how we as consumers were already evolving and changing. And our expectations on customer experience was already evolving and changing. So we were what I refer to as the on-demand economy, where we wanted everything immediately. And in this new world of digital transformation, our consumer preferences and the way we consume information, the way we behave, has also completely moved. And today, we live on our devices.
Yeah.
And the consumer requires everything on their device.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Hey, John, I want to ask you, when you've been talking around the world, you talk to different companies. I mean, as I said earlier, this runs through your DNA. I mean, if there's one country in the world that, I don't think there's any country in the world that John hasn't spoken in. He's been on every continent, basically. But John, are you seeing companies keeping up with the pace of this digital transformation? Are you seeing companies making mistakes? Are there going to be casualties from this, from companies who didn't see what was coming? Never mind the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic was something that just happened, but if you weren't paying attention to even before that, and understanding this transformation that's happening around us, you're going to become a casualty in the same way that Blockbuster Videos did, and BlackBerry, who ignored the main competition. What are you seeing out there, John?
So I think that because of this massive transition, many organizations are struggling because what they're asking their people to do is to keep the old business alive while they also think about the next business. And I think this makes many staff members around the world almost schizophrenic, because it's impossible to keep the old world alive and start to think about new businesses in the new world. So what I always suggest to businesses is try and split your teams into today teams and tomorrow teams. And your today team is all about innovation, efficiency, modifications to your current business structure. But your tomorrow team is focused on disruption. And disruption is all about making your current business model obsolete to create a new business model. And often these two ideologies are put into one executive team's sort of mandate. And this becomes incredibly difficult. Let me give you one quick example. In Japan, Japan Airlines is spending $70 million on understanding the future of travel. Now, what they've done is they've developed a whole new sector in their business to do this, because the future of travel, according to them, has got nothing to do with an airport, a pilot, or an airplane. It's got to do with an avatar system, a helmet, and a suit that you can wear, where you get sort of real visceral feelings of heat and cold and pressure, as well as obviously the visual. And they're using this future of travel experimentation with paraplegic people, with sick people that are inside hospital beds, and you can almost travel with anybody around the world to a destination. Now, is this the future of travel? We don't know. But Japan Airlines is experimenting and making sure that they've got one step ahead from anybody else. So yes, organizations that are asking their people to do both are struggling, and organizations that are holding on to their old successes are also struggling. And so we need to bring new people into decision-making processes, more diversity of both women, color, and age, to be able to make decisions for the future that's very different to the past.
That is so interesting. And is that the most impressive company that you've seen, John? I mean, you've worked with many different companies in this entire process. I mean, which are some of the companies, or one of the company that's like really impressed you the most, that you said, wow? And I know that you do a lot of work with the Singularity guys as well, but is there one company that stands out?
You know, it's so funny. It's not a company. It's the government of Dubai. You know, they have a minister of artificial intelligence. They have a minister of blockchain. They have a minister of happiness. Their structure is built to make it the most efficient and happy city in the world. And the way they think about the future is just unbelievable. I mean, do you know any company or any city that has a 2070 plan? I mean, they're thinking that far ahead.
Wow.
So for me, it's not a company. It's that country. And that's why I based myself there for a few months last year, is because I'm just so enthralled by the way they look at the future.
The Minister of Happiness, eh? I mean, imagine walking around and you see the guy feeling a bit down. Hey, smile, man. You're the Minister of Happiness. You're supposed to be setting an example. But it's true. I mean, when you look at these kind of things, I mean, I remember talking at a conference in 2010, the World Cup conference. And it was just before the actual World Cup soccer. And this conference was happening in Cape Town. It was the International Computer Association, or engineers globally. And I'll never forget this. I was the MC at the event, and I was interviewing the CEO of Cisco, and he was in San Francisco, and he appeared via hologram on the stage. That was like, 11 years ago. And at that time, it took massive amounts of data, massive amounts of technologies, but all of that technology has now been democratized. And Virgin Media in the UK have been experimenting with this now. And they're saying that we are very close. In fact, in the next 5 years, it's going to become almost a norm. Instead of the current Zoom meetings that we have and the Teams meetings, that it's going to be via hologram. So to John's point, you need to think ahead. You need to think what's happening tomorrow. But when you look at this and what John's been talking about and adopting all of these digital technologies, why is that key, Priscilla?
So Aki, for us, digital adoption is key for multiple reasons. And the first reason is you want a return on your investment. So there's no point in investing in technology but not adopting the technology.
Right.
And I think where organizations sometimes get it wrong is they take a piece of technology, implement it, but don't upskill their staff members to use that particular piece of technology. And that is something as an organization we look at and we enable digital adoption. I think also key to digital adoption is your employee capabilities, the skills capabilities. And to John's point, how do you have or how do you manage your current skill sets and how do you create skill sets for the future in order to enable digital adoption? And also key, I think, to digital adoption is your customer journeys. So you understand as an organization where your business needs to go to, and you've got certain digital adoption or digital technologies in place. But what are the customer touch points and what are the things that you need to do to ensure that your customers are getting the maximum benefit from the digital technologies that you've implemented?
I'm so glad you raised customers because, one of the things that, all organizations talk about is customer experience, right? Which is the most important thing. But organizations don't kind of live that in their DNA to try and produce it. And it comes back even further. And I know you want to comment on that, Daryl, but I guess that we've got these great technologies, right? If the people around you and your customers don't know how to use it to integrate together with your system, you're not unlocking any value. So all these companies are doing this massive digital transformation, but actually the core people within the organization and the customers are unsure how it all works, and you're not unlocking its true value, right?
Exactly.
So maybe I can make a comment.
Yeah, please do.
I think when we talk about experience, there's two experiences we need to factor into the equation and frame in the conversation. There's employee experience and there's customer experience. From the employee experience point of view, something which we found is that digital move post-COVID into this online world suddenly went from a novelty to employees actually being quite anxious and showing signs of depression, and that's what the studies are showing. So how do you bridge that gap and bring that employee up? You need to retrain on the soft skill side of things, making sure that the employee is going to embrace the future and take away that anxiety or depression of being stuck at home working in a Teams meeting. And from the customer experience point of view, our worlds have fundamentally changed. What we used to do every day is now completely different. Brick and mortar stores, your shopping has changed, the way you want to engage with a brand has changed, and all of these actually go into that customer experience journey. Is where's that journey starting and how do you curate that seamless customer engagement across the touch points that are so pervasive today, like social media and messaging, etc.
That's so interesting. But how do you actually get your staff engaged? How do you get over that hurdle of getting everybody on board, understanding what you're trying to do, and take them on this digital adoption journey, which is key? We know it has to happen. But how do you get the buy-in from your staff?
So I think the starting point, Aki, is for people to understand your vision. Where are you going as an organization, and why is it key for us to go that route as an organization? And the second component that's key is how are you expected to behave in order to take that forward as an organization? And once people understand the why, it's then easier to build interventions around it. Easier then to say, look, you need to develop these particular sets of skills because this is how it enables our journey going forward. And then also making the actual skills available, the capabilities available, and developing those capabilities for employees.
So it's to John's point earlier, as John was talking about this, is that you've got to empower your workforce. You've got to tell your workforce that we this is how we are going to help you to upskill you and to get this job done, because we've got to move in with the times. and we need to upskill you. We need you to understand the vision that we have as an organization. And if you've just joined us, a warm welcome to you. Welcome. It's great to have you here with us today. It's the Business Day Dialogue in partnership with Altron People Solutions. And wherever you are around the country, we welcome your comments. We want to hear what your experiences are. Perhaps in your organization, you can tell us what's been implemented that's been really successful, or the stuff that we talk about, the anxiety. And I mean, people have anxiety about change. And it's been so interesting to see, I mean, some of the anxiety I've seen in bricks and mortar stores, which you touched on earlier, that, you know, when the lockdown started, they had to change and they had to bring in e-commerce models. And of course, your entire work chain solution is not designed for e-commerce. Your front-end staff who are dealing with customers are not trained and designed to deal with customers buying things online. You must have seen some really interesting examples, Daryl. I mean, and I also want you to talk on the solutions and some of these examples that you've come across.
Sure. So from a customer experience point of view, we've seen some really, as you say, exciting, fascinating things happening. So the one is, to your point, you know, during lockdown, people, you know, aren't frequenting brick and mortar stores. They cut down going to skeleton staff, but the customer that is there actually does still require assistance. So what we've seen is a proliferation of QR codes, that you can still engage with someone by just scanning a QR code and creating what I refer to as that bridge or the conduit between your customer and the enterprise. And again, it does need to be in a traditional world. Today, the consumer's on their device. They have the device with them, and they're communicating, you know, directly with the organization. I think another fascinating story for me, funny enough, was working with one of our partners in the UK. One of the banks was considering putting QR codes on the back of all their cards. Again, just making it easy for that person to engage with the brand. So we're seeing, you know, a fundamental shift in these elements. But there's a concept that I like to talk about, which is called the digital fortress.
The digital fortress.
Digital fortress.
Okay.
And when I look at the
You've
digital
been playing
fortress,
Fortnite again.
my kids do.
Oh, okay.
A lot.
I love Fortnite. It's been the lockdown de-stressor actually, but we're talking about digital fortress in this example.
So I think what happened with COVID is everyone moved into this digital world.
Yeah.
And most organizations had their web strategy, they had an app strategy, they had a social media strategy.
Yes.
They often had an IVR in their contact center to try and just cope with the high volume of calls. Many organizations then went down the route of creating automation via what we refer to as chatbots today. But what they actually didn't do is create the conduit or the highway between that asset and the brand. Yes. Now today we call that the conversational strategy, is giving the ability to have a handshake in those assets and allow the consumer who's consuming information and navigating these assets to have a very easy interface back into the brand. And I think for me, we're seeing a big drive now in organizations moving to what we had as traditional methods of engaging with the organization to a far more digital first engagement where we're acknowledging that the consumer is using our assets but still needs to have that link or that bridge or that conduit back into the enterprise just to assist them over the line. So for me, it's a fascinating space at the moment, and we call it breaking down the digital fortress and creating the front door to your business. Yeah. Allowing that consumer to very easily engage with you. That's on the customer side. The other piece, which I think is worth mentioning, is we're seeing the same in our business process outsourcing, where your traditional channels, as you can imagine during COVID, call volumes are going through the roof. You can't cope with the volumes. We're seeing a big drive, even in those environments, to move into what we call the messaging first world. It's just making it easy for that consumer to engage the brand, irrespective of where that customer journey actually starts.
Right. So
that's in the contact center, in the social media, you know, in your on your websites, in your app, creating elements or entry points into your organization. And we're seeing a big shift in our BPO world, where consumers are moving into digital engagements.
Really? Well, it goes to your point about that customer satisfaction and the customer experience. You know, when you're trying to get hold of an organization and the call centers failed, and you know, it's really, really frustrating. So you've got to give the tools to your customer to be able to engage with you on different facets. I mean, as the managing director of Altron People Solutions, how's your role changed? I mean, when you look at Altron People Solutions, in 30 seconds, what exactly does Altron People Solutions do pre-COVID and now? Because I'm sure that your business strategy has changed as well.
Yeah, and Aki, I think the biggest change for us has been specifically around digital transformation. So prior to COVID, we saw ourselves as a customer experience organization. And with COVID, we quickly had to change how we do things. So our learning business went from classrooms to digital learning solutions. Our BPOs, our contact centers, also now have many more digital offerings within it. And our customer experience offerings also talking a lot more to our customers and our clients to understand what are your needs and how do we enable your customer journey for you. So it's gone from customer experience to a digital organization.
That's so interesting, so interesting. I just want to say hi to a couple of people who've been sending us some messages, and please use that hashtag, folks. It's hashtag Altron People Solutions, hashtag Business Day. We welcome your questions and your thoughts and your comments, whatever they might be. Lovely to have Greg with us this morning. Greg says he's back at the office since September, which was about 5-6 months that you were away. Thankfully, I'm not home in San Francisco. Well, listen, San Francisco's not too bad. Catherine Evans, hello to you. Catherine's been working at home since the lockdown, so she has not gone back to the office yet. Johan Stradom, working remotely from their offices and kind of half-half. And Johan's actually got a great question, and I want to bring John into this. I mean, John, we know that this is happening at a really fast pace, right? And you look at this digital transformation, everybody is like fast-tracking a lot of things, and I guess, you know, what Johan wants to know is, what is the end game? Is there an end game that we're all going to? And I guess with technology, there really isn't an end game, because we're continually evolving. As people, there's no end game, because as the human species, we continually evolve. But there's a lot of focus on digital transformation. What are we transferring from to, is the question that Johan asks. It's a bit of a hospital pass to you, John, because it's a really tough question. But I know that you deal a lot of this kind of stuff and how it impacts society, right?
So the thing for me is that there's a great book called The Fourth Turning that I suggest he reads, the person who asked the question. And what they explain in The Fourth Turning is that humanity goes through these cycles called saichelums. And these saichelums are about a plus minus 80-year cycles that humanity's been going through since the 1600s, or well, since they could track back history. And so what they realize that within these 80-year cycles, what we have are 4 mini cycles. And in these 4 mini cycles, we have almost seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter. The last time an 80-year cycle ended was World War II in 1946, where we saw the end, the destruction, and the implosion of the old world. We then saw the beginning of a new world in the late 1940s and early 50s, where we saw the development of the United Nations, the IMF, and all the structures that we're living within right now. We are today in winter, the end of another 80-year cycle, where we start to transition from an industrial revolution, innovation, process-driven society towards a quantum, digital, dynamic society as we move into the first turning. Unfortunately, with all transformations, what we have is the sad, the strange, and the adventure. And we are squarely in the sad and the strange. Things are sad because they're not like they used to be. There's no familiarity. Things are strange because nothing makes sense. We can't anchor ourselves into anything. And so people are desperate for some level of certainty, which unfortunately is not available at the moment. So what we have to do is spend the next few years as we go through this transition, really taking the time to unlearn and relearn what this new world looks like and what skills we need to take in with us. So I definitely foresee education becoming a massive new sector as we start seeing adults retraining themselves for the world that we're moving into, not utilizing and sort of resting on their laurels from their old skill sets. So yes, where are we going to? What's the end point? The end point is the ending of this 80-year cycle, according to the Fourth Turning, 2026 to 2028. And then really looking forward to a renaissance, a new spring of how we start evolving as humanity.
Wow. Well, listen, I've been watching quite a bit of Vikings on Netflix, and I'm glad that 80-year cycle of the saculum has long passed. I mean, as human beings, we've gone through some very violent parts of our history, right? And I guess we're a lot more peaceful now. We're a lot more healthier now. We've got a lot more digital resources to our disposal right now, but yet there's this massive digital divide, right? We're still experiencing that in Africa. But I've been chatting to some really interesting people over the last couple of months, and one of them is this massive organization that's putting out data centers, you know, across the continent. The amount of money that's been spent on the continent, either it is in data centers. I mean, you look at the data centers in South Africa. 3-4 years ago, we didn't have data centers. Now we've got a few. And the amount of fiber that's going into the ground. So where I'm going with this is that our growth curve and our digital transformation is going to be, compared to the way it is in other countries, we're expected to see this massive change in digital transformation across the continent, which is fantastic for all our economies. But are we ready to deal with this digital transformation? To your point earlier, and the societal gap that John was talking about, how do we go about embracing digital transformation? I mean,